My name is Lynn Tarter, and I head up the solutions team here at TMC, a Berlitz company. I will be your moderator on the topic of virtual teamwork and collaboration through integration of the Cultural Navigator today. My team member, Lakeisha Ward, and I will handle all the questions that you type into the question box. We are pleased to partner with Jan Goedvolk and Andrew Turksek in this webinar. Jan is the Global Solution Director for Berlitz Emerging Markets region, and Andrew manages our online solutions development team. And he will guide us through how the Cultural Navigator can be used as a value add to virtual teamwork and collaboration, which is the topic that Jan is going to speak to today. Just a few housekeeping items we'd like to go over before we start today's session. First, to reduce background noise during the presentation, participants will be muted throughout today's webinar. You can please type questions in the question box at any time during the presentation. We will reserve 30 minutes at the end for a moderated question and answer session. Third, we'll be recording today's session, and after the webinar, we will share the link with you by email back to the email ID you used at registration. And finally, we're letting you know up front that when we switch presenters, you may experience a pause in the presentation. Please stay with us. All right, we appreciate that you're here with us today, so let's get started. We'd like to start by understanding who's on the line with us today. Let us know what your organizational role is by choosing from the following items: talent management, organizational development, training, business line leader, or other. And if you choose other, go ahead and type into our chat box. And let's take a look, Lakeisha. Who's joining us today? All right, most of our participants, 63% of them, are in the training field, and then we have organizational development as well as business line leaders on the line with us today. Welcome, everyone. At this time, I'd like to hand it over to Jan. Go ahead, Jan.
Thank you, Lynn, for the introduction. Good day, everyone. So let's first look at what an effective definition of a virtual team would be. The most commonly accepted definition seems to be an interdependent group working across time and distance, communicating primarily using telecommunications. These days, I doubt whether any organization can survive without frequent and extensive virtual teamwork. Of course, there are many benefits to virtual teamwork or communication. Closer contact with globally dispersed customers, clients, and colleagues. It guarantees diverse input from diverse members with local expertise. You can select the best talent from anywhere in the world to work on a project. Of course, there's lower cost, no need to relocate talent, as well as less travel involved. And furthermore, faster speed to market, with people across time zones, so you can follow the sun, as they say. But then, what are the major challenges of virtual teamwork? Below are a few options that Lakeisha will put on the screen just in a second. I'll go through them with you. And what I would like you to do when they do come on the screen is to let us know which one you feel in your experience is the major challenge for you and your organization. Firstly, more misunderstandings, partly because of a lack of visual and verbal clues, and just as importantly, due to cultural and linguistic barriers. Secondly, lack of identity with team, which can cause feelings of isolation leading to lower motivation. Third, difficulty in measuring engagement. It can be difficult to proactively detect any lack of engagement in virtual team members, which can lead to lower productivity and morale. Fourth, it is extremely challenging to build trust, community, or a sense of inclusion, which again can lower morale with a negative effect on productivity. And lastly, time zone differences. I think we're all experiencing that today. Working across time zones can create complications, especially where teleconferences are often scheduled at the end of the day. So take a minute to consider these options and let's see what you think. From what we have on the screen, it's clear that the fourth point, it is extremely challenging to build trust and community, is definitely the primary cause of issues working in virtual teams. And that really reflects also what we have experienced from TMC and Berlitz's side as well. So yes, I think that's definitely accurate. And of course, the second one there is difficulty in measuring engagement. So these are definitely topics that we will touch on today. So let's move on. Research also shows that not all virtual teams are equally virtual. Some have greater virtual distance than others. Physical distance, geographical distance, time zones and organizational boundaries, plus operational distance, inadequate information and communication technology, a lack of common context for working and distractions, plus affinity distance, differences in culture, lack of shared vision and low trust equals virtual distance. And from your responses, it seems that especially affinity distance and of course operational distance might be issues for you here. Key findings from both research and best practices across many industries reveal that effective distance leadership includes, of course, the typical fundamentals for leading people and managing resources in a traditional office environment. However, difficulties in the traditional environment can be significantly magnified in virtual or remote situations. Difficulty with communicating, working together, and producing high-quality on-time results is typically heightened by distance. So, moving on. From our discussion with clients, 3 distinct challenges are mentioned again and again. 3 things leaders of high-performing virtual teams should focus on: communication, managing performance, and building a sense of community and inclusion. The last one, like we saw, seems to be the biggest issue that you are experiencing at the moment. So to overcome virtual distance, these activities require twice the time, effort, and energy. So what can a leader do in preparation for virtual teamwork, looking at the activities mentioned above? Let's look at communication first. Like with most of the points mentioned above, you will have to spend twice as much time on this as you would in face-to-face settings. So what do you need to do? Before the actual project or teamwork starts, you need to ensure that you spend time with the individual team members. Spend time with them specifically individually to get to know them and allow them to get to know you. If at all possible, it is advisable to have a face-to-face kickoff meeting. However, I would still advise, even if you do have a face-to-face kickoff meeting, that you have a teleconference with individual members first, for the following reasons. Number 1, you can discuss their individual roles in the team and for the project, as well as for the success of the collaboration. Secondly, you can get their individual input on the structure of the project, how they see themselves contributing, and what you can do to ensure effective virtual collaboration. Especially as often we deal with cross-border collaboration, you will have linguistic issues to deal with. Most teleconferences will be in English, and to speak to them online, you can gauge their ability to comprehend and express themselves in the language. You can also get their input on what you can do to make life a little easier for them when it comes to communicating in English. Here are some suggestions from our side that I think you could usefully incorporate when you do set up the ground rules for virtual communication. But due to time constraints, I'm not going to go through each of them individually, but of course you will have the slides and the recording of the session. So please have a look at these, and I hope that they will be helpful to you. Something else that's very important, and you will see the quote on the next page, is that the economist says that basically 25% of the global workforce are expected to speak a language other than their native tongue. But to be honest, I think that from our experiences, and especially here in Asia, that's closer to 100%. So let's see what the Cultural Navigator can do to help mitigate these challenges that you can face. So Andrew, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you everyone for joining us today and this evening for our webinar. One of the tools that we do provide to you within the Cultural Navigator that helps you to understand culture and cultural differences is that of the Cultural Orientations Indicator Assessment, or COI. This assessment measures your own personal cultural preferences in work situations and gives you insights into how you approach tasks and also look to communicate with your peers, and helps to build a foundation for understanding how culture can impact you and your work relationships within your virtual teams. So the learning path or a guided experience that walks you through completing the Cultural Orientations Indicator, or COI assessment, is entitled Building Self-Awareness, which we see here on our screens. This learning path is actually the first item that is recommended to you as a new user to the Cultural Navigator, and is our suggested point of reference in terms of where you begin your own personal cultural competence journey within the Cultural Navigator. The learning path itself provides you with an overview of the steps that are included within the Cultural Orientations Indicator. It gives you a bit of context on each, as well as a time estimate for each of the steps included. And then as you begin the activities here, you learn a bit, of course, first about why it's important for you to build your own self-awareness, what you will gain from completing the assessment online. But once you go through this material and understand what the assessment measures and how it can assist you in your in collaborating with your virtual teams, you're then presented with the option to walk through the assessment itself. You will take the COI assessment in three different dimensions. We have a dimension, interaction style, that measures how you tend to engage with others within work situations, so your communication preferences. Thinking style, which measures how you process information and also approach scheduling tasks. And then also your sense of self, or how you view yourself within your work environment. So you're able to complete the COI assessment in any order that you choose. So you can start either at the step 4 here, sense of self, or begin from interaction style. And then once you go through each section of the assessment, you would be able to review your own detailed report. The COI report provides you with an overview of those cultural preferences that you do have within the dimension that you've completed or selected. So as you see here in interaction style, we can have a summary overview of all of the work style preferences that I have in terms of how I approach communication and such with my counterparts at work. I can see here I have a tendency for a being orientation. Understand that that means I tend to build relationships, or look to build relationships before focusing on tasks, and then choose to either scroll down or select the items within the summary view to access a full debrief analysis for each orientation. So the information that you see here will help to highlight more situations and more points for you to understand in terms of how your orientation may impact your work relationships, some challenges you may encounter when working with others of the opposite orientation within your teams, scenarios that help to explain your orientation in a work context, and then, of course, links to resources that are available to you on the Cultural Navigator that will help to further explain your own work preferences. In addition to the textual report here, we also provide an audio component within each of your orientation debrief views that will help to explain a bit more about what it means to be being oriented in a work environment. All of this information and the COI assessment itself is available in over 10 languages, so you can complete this assessment and review your report in your own native tongue, and then be able to work off of the results here to understand how culture can impact you personally in a work environment. I'll go into a bit later in terms of how you can then use this information to analyze your own work style with your team members. But before turning it back over to Jan, I wanted to touch on one other area that is of interest for you in our discussion today, which is located under the Learning Center here in the topic areas category. Topic areas are broad categories that help to organize information on the Cultural Navigator and give you access to specific pieces of content that help you to understand about a particular topic or skill set. So here you see we have a topic area focused on teams, which connects you to a variety of resources on the right-hand side here, including job aids and scenarios, as well as several guided learning paths. So you can go through the learning paths that are available to you within your account to review best practices for communication or for email and also video conferences when working within your teams, and then be able to be guided through some of the information available to you on the Cultural Navigator to improve upon your own work style approach to working with your team members. So the Cultural Navigator provides you with the ability to understand your own cultural preferences, and then gives you information through the teams area as well as through the other areas of the application to better understand the impact of culture at a team level. But for a deeper discussion in terms of how to manage performance within your teams, I'd like to pass it back over to Jan. Jan?
Thank you, Andrew. Now let's look at managing performance. Virtual leaders manage performance through providing structure. Firstly, you need to set clear objectives and goals with input from each member. You also need to create a specific step-by-step plan which should be discussed and buy-in received with and by the whole team. Thirdly, it's important to establish milestones for the individuals and also, of course, for the team as a whole. These need to be discussed individually with each member for individual milestones and confirmed and committed with the whole group. You also need to give frequent and clear feedback to each team member during any group communication and individually if the message might be considered sensitive. Checking progress is also extremely important, which can be done through teleconference, individually, or with the team, or of course by email. It is important to choose the right communication platform for that specific communication, and this is a point that we cannot overemphasize. In many cases, a teleconference is not necessarily the best way to communicate the information that needs to be communicated. So keep that in mind and choose the correct platform. Next, I would like to turn to, I think, what all of us realize is probably the hardest, and that's building community and inclusion. This is probably the hardest of the three activities and requires constant and frequent maintenance to ensure that all participants feel a sense of community and trust in each other and in you as a leader. A sense of community includes demonstrations of sensitivity to differences, knowing and understanding your own cultural preferences, understanding those of the other team members, and having the skills to overcome these differences as embodied in the 4 cultural skills. This is, of course, where the COI and the Cultural Navigator will be essential to prepare yourself and team members for the teamwork. Every potential kickoff should be preceded by a meeting where COIs are compared, differences acknowledged, and strategies created to overcome these differences. We also need to establish and adhere to ground rules and agreement among the members for how the team will function. Once again, it is advisable to do this in a face-to-face kickoff meeting, but if not possible, can be done virtually using both teleconference and email, giving enough time and opportunity for everyone's opinions and needs to be considered. This will go a long way to building trust, engagement, and a sense of inclusions. Actions that meet the established and agreed upon commitments will build and strengthen trust. We need to also be extremely sensitive to any action or behavior that can be perceived as biased, culturally insensitive, or somehow an unbalanced treatment of others, as members could easily react negatively to this, which can lead to them withholding that additional amount of discretionary effort and creativity. And of course, you will be the last one to find out that this has actually happened. So I'd like to tell you a very brief story about a colleague of mine from the US who recently had to lead a virtual team. She had members from Japan, Belgium, Germany, Korea, US, Mexico, Slovakia, and France in her team. So before starting the project, she made sure that everyone did their COIs and shared their profiles with each other through the Cultural Navigator and also through our own intranet to ensure that everyone got to know each other a little bit. They were not able to have a face-to-face kickoff meeting, but she used the Cultural Navigator to create a team, and in their first teleconference they did a team gap analysis and team aggregate report, and everyone had an opportunity to introduce themselves. They briefly discussed some ground rules for conducting the teleconferences and what each member expected. These ground rules were sent out afterwards, and team members were given time to comment or make further suggestions. Everyone agreed and the project got underway. As the project continued, she realized that her Korean and Japanese colleagues were less likely to share the sales pipelines for their countries during the calls or afterwards, which was one of the points agreed upon with their colleagues. During the teleconferences, other team members started commenting on this. The team leader would also often joke and use humor during the calls to lighten the mood and attempt to bring people closer together. Gradually, she felt that the Korean and Japanese members were often absent for calls and would be reluctant to participate or speak during calls. So she asked me what I suggest she do. I suggested she have an individual call with both of them to see if she could get to the bottom of this and find a way to get them more involved. So then the question is, what did she do wrong? How could she have avoided the exclusion her colleagues from Korea and Japan felt? She thought that she had covered all the bases. Any ideas? I would love to hear your ideas, and if you could provide them in the Q&A box on the platform, that would be wonderful. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Let's see if there are any comments. My platform seems to have frozen. Lynn or Lakeisha, could you help me out here and see if there are any specific comments mentioned?
Hi, Jan, this is Lynn. Not yet. We don't have any questions other than observations, what she did wrong. In fact, not being culturally astute came in. That's just an observation. So
Yes.
I suppose you can proceed at this point.
Okay, so the need for belonging and building a sense of community and identifying with a group and cultivating some level of bonding is important for overcoming social isolation and disconnection. Here on the screen, as you can see, are some of the observable actions that promote and build a sense of community and inclusion. I would like to just emphasize a few. Some of them are relatively obvious. So if you look at the second one there, give everyone an opportunity for input, which also means opportunity for group and individual feedback and dialogue. The third one there, respect preferences for type and frequency of communication. So this is an issue that you need to discuss during the actual dialogue about what the ground rules should be. There, it's also showing respect for differences in interaction and thinking styles of members. And the last one that I think is quite important is keeping commitments and admitting mistakes or failures when they occur, but in as sensitive a manner as possible to ensure that face is not lost. If we look at the behavior of my colleague, the fact is that she might have set ground rules and given everyone a chance to comment and give input, but she did not have an individual talk with each person before finalizing anything. If she had done that, she would have realized that for her Korean and Japanese colleagues, sharing the requested information was a problem. For the Korean, it was something in the hierarchical office environment he was in. He had to clear with his direct supervisor, and rather than directly discuss this with her or others, he hoped in an indirect way she would realize that he did not have this approval. As for the Japanese colleague, data protection laws are extremely strict in Japan, and this is something that is emphasized in the work environment. So again, she did not feel comfortable sharing this information, but did not want to directly communicate this, but rather indirectly attempted to get her point across. As for humor, she thought would help build some team spirit, but of course she did not realize how many specific cultural references it included, so that her colleagues from Asia had little understanding of what some of the other members found so funny, which made them feel excluded. So, even when you do most things right, some very small but obvious things can cause you unnecessary problems. So keep this in mind, so to avoid these mistakes, but at the same time, if you do, be sensitive enough to pick up on it, admit mistakes, and correct them as soon as possible. And keep this quote in mind. Cross-border collaboration is a critical skill, but cultural traditions are what most often get in the way. So let's look in more detail how the Cultural Navigator and the COI can help us accomplish some of the above. And Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Jan. And with the Cultural Navigator, as I mentioned before, once you complete your COI assessment online, you really unlock a wide variety of different possibilities for you to explore in terms of the content or also some of the features that are available to you online. So one of those features that I'd like to highlight for our purposes today is located within the Cultural Navigator network, which is accessible within the upper bar, navigational bar here. Within the network, you'll find a section devoted to teams, the ability for you to join or create teams online within the Cultural Navigator and invite your own counterparts that you work with every day. So on the left-hand side here, you'll find a button that says Create a Team, in which you can define a team name, description for the team, and then publish that team to your own personal account, from which you would be able to invite individual members from your own organization. So once you set up a team, as you see here, you'll be able to access the team details page, where you can engage in team discussions in the middle of the page here, view a full listing of the different team members that have joined your team, see some recommendations and recent completions your fellow colleagues have done on the Cultural Navigator, and most importantly, access some of the comparison tools that are unique to teams within the application itself. So one of the tools that are available to you is called the Team Gap Analysis. This particular feature takes your own COI assessment and compares it to the colleagues that you select. So I'll just choose the top 4 colleagues here and compare our interaction style preferences. Of course, you can compare all 3 dimensions of the COI assessment. You can compare one or even another subset of different areas within the Cultural Navigator. But within each of the dimensions that you select, you would be able to review a full breakdown in terms of how your preference matches up against those of your team members. So here, for example, within the fixed and fluid continuum, you can see that I have a mild fluid orientation in terms of how I approach tasks and time management, which is shared with 3 of my colleagues. Julia and Diana share my personal preference. But on the opposite side of the continuum here, you can see there are 2 individuals in our team that have a very strong fixed orientation. So when I select that particular gap, I get an alert of the 2 individuals, both of which are on our call today with us, Lakeisha and Lynn, and be able to understand a bit about the cultural gap we may experience when working with one another, some challenges that we may encounter as we look to approach tasks and and work together as a team, and then also resources that are available to you on the Cultural Navigator that will help to further explain this particular cultural gap and give you an insight into the different experiences that you may encounter as a team. So each of the continua within interaction style are represented in a similar manner, in which you can see the distribution of the results, as well as those situations in which you have a cultural gap. So as we scroll through the report here, you can see those potential gaps highlighted in red, and be able to select each of those items within your report to receive a debrief analysis. The other tool that is available for you as a team once you set up a team online is that of the aggregate report. The team aggregate report takes all of the cultural preferences that are within the team, which is built off of each team member's COI assessment, and compares them at a team level, and represents and displays the different patterns that are shown within each of the cultural continua. So here, again, that fixed and fluid continuum, we can see the breakdown for all of the team members now in terms of how we approach scheduling tasks and timelines. Once we look into the debrief text here, you can see that there is a relatively equal distribution in terms of both orientations. And then we can learn a bit more about some of the challenges that we may face as a team when working together. So the information and the different comparison reports that are available to you within the Cultural Navigator, and specifically within the Teams area of your network, can help you to avoid some of the challenges that Jan's colleague had encountered, and to give you access into understanding how culture can really impact you when you're looking to work either in a virtual team setting or even within your own diverse team environments. But to conclude our discussion today, and to get to some of the questions that we've received from you, I'd like to pass the discussion over to Lynn. Lynn?
Thanks so much, Andrew, and thanks so much, Jan, as well, at the beginning of your day, and Andrew at the end of your day. So we'd like to ask just two questions here to wrap up our session. What's the most interesting point that you have seen in this new version of the Cultural Navigator at this point? Is it the overall updated look, perhaps the ease of navigation, the customizable user interface, the updated cultural orientations indicator assessment, or the collaborative learning tools? And so I'll give you another second, and then Lakeisha, let's take a look at what our participants say. The collaborative learning tools and the updated cultural orientations indicator are where our participants are headed. Thank you so much. Taking the opposite viewpoint, what do you think will be the biggest challenge you'll face in launching or driving usage of the tool in your organization? Is it having marketing materials, getting the message out to your organization, driving usage in terms of numbers of participants that use the Cultural Navigator, or answering questions about the web tool? And go ahead, if it's other, type into the chat box what your comment might be. All right, and Lakeisha, let's take a look at what people have to say now. And driving usage continues to be our top priority. Getting the message out and answering questions for sure seem to be challenges as well. So thank you so much for your input. At this point, I'd like to summarize the power of the Cultural Navigator by referring just to the 4 key pillars upon which we built the Cultural Navigator. It's personalized to each user, and the front page interface of the Cultural Navigator is where that personalization really pays off. The collaborative learning environment is built into the tool so users can follow and connect with the broader networks, as Andrew pointed out. The online learning is relevant to each client at the organizational level. As you guys can customize options and unique features that are available on a mass level to the entire organization. And finally, the Cultural Navigator is representative of all of our product offerings, and as an example, provides an excellent pre- and post-session platform for extended learning for face-to-face or web-based sessions. So I hope you can join us for another webinar in this series that's being held monthly from now until July of this year. And we'll share this listing of upcoming webinars with you by email, along with this recorded webinar and the slides that go with it. So we want to thank you for your time today, and we hope this webinar has been a value add to you in understanding how the Cultural Navigator learning platform can help with your virtual teamwork and collaboration initiatives in your organization. We now end the recorded portion of today's program and move into the Q&A section of this webinar. Thanks so much for